Okay, so here it goes. In the Ten Commandments, God tells us, among other things, that thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. And from that, generally speaking, the church has decided, again, I think wrongly, actually, that this is actually forbidding that we should lie. And so I have seen on many, many occasions that people in situations where they are put in front of situations where there's an ethical tension between telling the truth or telling the lie. I'll give you an example. A very famous one is by Corrie ten Boom's sister. Her family was hiding Jews in the cellar during World War II, the end of World War II, when German Nazis, were trying to kill Jews left, right, and center. And on one particular occasion, German Gestapo officers came into their house and were searching the house for Jews. They couldn't find them, although they had a suspicion that the family was hiding them. And so in the end, the Gestapo officer actually, in exasperation, asked, "Where are you hiding those Jews?" And Corrie ten Boom's sister, who was a teenager at the time, a young teenager, she felt as a Christian she had to tell the truth. And so she actually pointed at the kitchen table and she said, "We are hiding them under the table," which was actually the truth. Because the family had they had a trap door in the kitchen to the cellar, and they were hiding that family in the cellar. And in order to hide that trap door, they put a table on top of it and a big tablecloth and everything else that covered that. And when Corrie ten Boom's sister said that, the Gestapo officer just laughed, and then they left. So by God's amazing grace, Corrie's sister got away with it. But can you see the dilemma here? There's an actual ethical dilemma between, so often when we say the truth, we might actually cause more harm than if we lied. So on the basis of this, I would posit, and I'm not the only one who is saying this, but very few people in the church have really been taught this properly, so I'm trying to do it to you now. If you are put in front of an ethical situation where telling the truth causes a greater evil than lying, then lying is the lesser evil and is therefore by definition the right thing to do. Does that make sense? A friend of mine, very famous professor in Old Testament, he was actually supervising a PhD student who was studying for his PhD about lying in the Old Testament. And this young man came up with a stunning hypothesis that was actually accepted by none other than Wheaton College. And his hypothesis was that as he looked at all of the incidents of lying in the Old Testament, and there's quite a few of them, believe it or not, the Bible is full of lies. Yes, you heard your pastor say that, right? He discovered that every time when somebody lied in the Old Testament for a good purpose, God sanctioned it and blessed it. So if you're lying for a good purpose, it's okay to lie. Stunning, right? Wow. Okay, so we got that one out of the way. Now let's go to our letter by James written on straw. This is, of course, Martin Luther, the great reformer, fellow German. I don't think he would like me very much if he was still alive. and I don't like a lot of what he was teaching back in the day. There's a lot of good things he taught, but there are also some problematic ones. And I think this particular one is highly problematic because James is kind of a little bit unusual in the New Testament because James makes a point. We heard that last week where we had another reading from James, and we are hearing it this time round from yet another section in James. James insisted that if you want to be a follower of Jesus, just believing the right things is not enough. You also have to do what is right. And back in the day, Luther, responding to some of the problematic things that were going on in the Roman Catholic Church at that time, discovered for himself something that is important, and that is why we are still here as Protestants 500 years later. Namely, that we cannot be saved through works, but we can only be saved by faith through grace. And I agree with that part of Luther. Where I think, however, Luther went wrong is that to a large degree he went so far as to say, or certainly that is how he has been understood largely within Protestantism, that once you have faith and once you have accepted God's grace and you are saved, then how you actually live your life does not matter. And this is the reason why Luther found James difficult. And so he actually, in his introduction to his translation into German of the Bible, he gave a little introduction to each of the biblical books, and he also gave one about James. And in that introduction, he said, James is an epistle of straw, which is basically downplaying its importance for Protestants. And this is one of the reasons why not many sermons are actually preached about the letter of James in Protestantism, for this very reason. So now we got that on one side. But can you see how James is actually saying, if we want to be Christians, we got to somehow learn what to do about our tongue, how we talk. So I hope you're kind of having a little bit of fun here as well with my sermon, because I'm actually now going to contradict what I said earlier. I hope you get that. So earlier I said, hey, actually, it's okay to lie. Well, I didn't actually say that. What I said is it's okay to lie if telling the truth would cause more harm, right? Here now, James is saying we can use that same tongue to set an entire forest ablaze. And of course, that's a metaphor for the hearts and the emotions of people. You know, you can say something to people and you can destroy them. Yeah. Just the right phrase dropped in at the right moment can spoil another person's day or week, or send them spiraling into a depression. Our words, with our tongue, we can actually kill each other. You know what I mean by that? Metaphorically speaking, we can actually kill someone with our words. And of course, James is saying this because he realizes this is a very serious matter here. And so it's not just about, but I told him the truth. He deserved to hear that. Oh, really? And this now brings us to the sermon of Jesus. And remember last week we talked about the fact that Jesus says, I have not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And I argued in my sermon last week that when Jesus said that, he was not now making the law more strict. He is also not abolishing it, and this is sometimes how Luther has been misunderstood and how in Protestantism we have been behaving. As if there's no law at all and we can do whatever we like. As soon as we are saved, we're going to heaven and then it doesn't matter anymore. Jesus is here saying, no, it does matter. If you really want to follow me and be a follower of Jesus, you got to live like Jesus. And it's got to be a life of love, which is, of course, why in this church, in our mission statement, we say we exist as a church to foster a no-holds-barred love for God, a proper love for self, and a caring love for all of our neighbors. It is all about love. And how we love each other has also to do with our tongue. And so what I've said last week, and this is really very, very important for the rest of this entire sermon series, is really to see that what Jesus does is he is neither abolishing the law, nor, as he has also very often been misunderstood, neither is he making it more strict. Even though it sounds like that. Let me read the opening phrase from our gospel reading here this morning. This is in chapter 5, verse 21. You have heard that it was said to those in ancient times, you shall not murder. Verse 22. But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable. If you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable. If you say, you fool, you will be liable. And liable to what? The hell of fire! Now, okay, I admit it. It does sound like Jesus makes it more strict, right? You know what Martin Luther did with this? Martin Luther said, Jesus is now making it so strict that nobody can possibly fulfill this. It's absolutely impossible. And therefore we don't even have to try. What Jesus really wanted to do in this sermon is to help us to see just how fallen human beings we are and how incapable we are of properly loving our neighbors. We cannot fulfill the law. It is all and only about grace. By grace through faith alone. And so Jesus was preaching this in order to tell us no righteousness by works. It's all by grace, all by faith, all alone, and nothing else, and it doesn't matter. Can you see, interestingly, how Jesus could be misunderstood in both directions here? Yeah. And so what I'm trying to now going to argue, and I hope I can convince you that this is right, even though it is a minority opinion. What Jesus is doing here is not making the law irrelevant. He's not abolishing it. But he's also not making it more strict. But rather, what he is doing is he is helping us to see what the real purpose of the law is. Let me explain. The contrast that Jesus draws is between one of the commands from the Ten Commandments that we had heard earlier. You shall not murder. Yeah? That's what you've been told. Now, what about if I torture somebody? Is that okay? I'm not breaking the law, you shall not murder. So that's okay, isn't it? No, it's not okay, right? Because what God's command in the Ten Commandments is getting at is, ultimately, it's about loving our neighbor. But, of course, you can't actually convict someone of a crime. This is about legal terminology. You can convict someone of murder, right? Can you convict someone of not liking someone else? You see what I'm getting at? What Jesus is now doing here is he's trying to help us to see what the real purpose behind the law is in the Old Testament was. Yeah, we are all okay. I haven't killed anyone. I'm okay. Yeah, but you have just set an entire forest ablaze with your tongue. And so now let's read this again with that, forest fire imagery in mind. I say to you that if you're angry with a brother or sister, if you insult your brother or sister, if you call them a fool, you see the point I'm trying to make? Do you see the point that Jesus is trying to make here? It's not just about not hating our brother. The way Jesus has come to fulfill the law is by, first of all, modeling to us how he loved everybody, including the people who were nasty to Jesus. And he is now inviting us to follow him and follow his example by loving all our neighbors, including the awkward ones, including the nasty ones, including the ones who vote for a different political party, including the ones, and you can put your own words and names in there. Yeah, if you think, so here's a challenge. Okay, name to me 10 fools that you know. I bet you won't say it, because you're way too well educated and well too polite and you're very well brought up and you have good manners. But I bet you, if I say to you, name 3 fools you know, at least 3 people's minds come to mind, right? You can think of 3. Bev says no. You can think of 5, 6, 7?
I'm a bigger fool than anybody I know.
I love you, Beth. Can I say to you, I don't think you are a fool. I think saying that is actually an amazing sign of wisdom, right? That's self-knowledge, and that's humility. Yeah, and this is, I think, what Jesus is getting at here. Yeah, it's Jesus is saying, if you want to fulfill the law of God, it's not enough not to kill someone, not to torture someone or whatever. You are actually supposed to love them so much that you care for them. Now I want to go further in this. I want to read on now from, from verse 23. So Jesus has made the point so far and said, treat your neighbor with love. Don't just not murder them, but actually treat them with love. And then he says this, and again, this is so amazingly misunderstood, I think. Jesus goes on and he says, so when you're offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. Most people think that what Jesus means here is that if someone else has harmed you, and you want to come to the church service, have Holy Communion, or in the case of a Jewish person, you want to bring your gift to the altar, all of that sort of thing, you first have to forgive them. Because if you hate them for what they've done to you, and then you are not right with God. That is how almost always this passage has been interpreted. This actually happened to me just a few weeks ago. I was actually talking to a colleague of mine about another colleague of mine. Yes, I was gossiping. Yes, I was. All that tongue and setting forest ablaze. I was doing this, and I was complaining about my other colleague who had done something that really hurt me and that upset me. And my colleague I was talking to said, "You should now go to him and tell him that and then forgive him. Because," and then he quoted this very passage. And this colleague is actually a New Testament scholar, a quite well-known one. And I'm an Old Testament scholar. And when he said that to me, I said, "You're wrong." And I said, when Jesus says that, he is not talking to the victim, he is talking to the perpetrator. And that switches the whole thing around. Too often, for too long, we have applied this passage to the victims. But it's actually to the perpetrators. So it's actually saying, and this is of course important, once Jesus in the first part of this has told us, don't talk negatively about your brother or sister, but actually love them even when they are difficult and they have done something to you that wasn't right. You ought to not now pay them back by insulting them or whatever, humiliating them and so on. Here now, however, Jesus says, yeah, and by the way, of course, you're also not supposed to harm other people so that they might speak to you about you in that way. But if you have done something wrong to somebody, you've got to make it right. And isn't it strange how in the Christian church for now hundreds of years, we have misinterpreted this passage and have made the lives of victims even worse by saying, God cannot forgive you or love you unless you somehow forgive the people who have harmed you. And they get off free. What is that? So, and if you are still not convinced that Jesus is really talking about the perpetrator here, just go with me to the end of that passage, because Jesus says, if you do not make it right, so verse 25, come to terms quickly with your accuser, which is the victim, because you're the perpetrator, your accuser. While you're on the way to court with him, your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and you will be thrown into prison. You will not get out until you repaid your debt. This really is talking to the perpetrator. And again, if we want to follow Jesus, we should not do wrong things anymore. And if we have done something wrong, we are called upon to make it right. That is how we love our neighbor properly, as we should, and actually care for them. Because let's face it, you and I, we also sometimes, maybe quite regularly, do things that are wrong. We do need forgiveness. But, and this is now where the faith and the grace and the mercy of God comes in. Once we really understand how Jesus leads us into fulfilling the law by loving each other properly, because through his love, he has helped us to love ourselves properly, we will be and can be right with God, and not only with God, but also with each other. Because we stop harming each other, whether it's through our tongues or anything else. Okay.